Hello, here with Mr. Ben and Mr. Jonathan, and we're discussing SI, and that's the quickest intro you've ever seen. So, Ben, take it away.
Right, okay, here we go. So, one of the things you'll hear, because now we're on the fourth one, can you add the screen, Hailey? So, you'll hear maybe probably from other videos that these functions, NI, NE, SI, and SE, are perceiving functions. They're not perceiving functions, they're irrational functions. Um, and that distinction of perceiving and judging is a bit of a false distinction. And actually, Vanderhoop made the point when he was criticizing Jung. That's why I suggest people read, especially INTPs out there, read Vanderhoop's Conscious Orientation and his criticism of Jung, and you'll be both impressed and annoyed at yourself and you'll think probably something like, "What did I think of this?" These little errors that Jung made in his assumptions are obvious in hindsight. So, for example, he wrote about Jung saying that that feeling determines how someone reacts to something, whether it's good or bad. But actually, but then we'll learn from MBTI that it's the judging functions that are about how you evaluate an experience. Like Linda Barons will say, these are the evaluative functions. But hang on a minute, all the functions are evaluative. So, for example, when we did artisans, they're all evaluating experience by how exciting it is, how stimulating it is, the sort of the sensory stimulation of it. The guardians that we're going today, and SI, will evaluate an experience by how customary it, how safe it feels, how comfortable they feel. So all of these functions evaluate an experience. NI may be with how it fits with the person on a path. So Jonathan might be a new Hailey. It's like when I go off topic, you might evaluate the experience. Part of the NI might come with Ben's going off track, whereas the NE, someone else was in here who was NE, they might be go with the idea, go with that tangent, that's interesting. So do you see what I mean? It's like all of the functions are evaluative. So this distinction between judging and perceiving isn't good from that point of view. And from this point of view, this is how perception is defined by, and in cognitive psychology. Something like, even now, when you're listening to my words and you're hearing these sounds and you're forming them into words, or when someone's learning a language and like you're trying to decipher, or you hear words come out of someone's mouth, but you can't quite catch what word they've said, you're perceiving the words from the sounds, or you're perceiving letters from, it's all perception. It's this making sense of this sensory information. So what I would say is that all of the senses that come in to you, I would call that reception. And the perception is made. It's like when they used to have analog televisions, they'll talk about the reception on the television. What is the reception like? So, and all of this sensory input that comes in, the thing about that is that it gets mixed up with the limbic system. And it's actually been shown that it goes directly to it. There's actually a shortcut where you can actually get, what they actually found out is that somebody can react limbically, emotionally to a sensory input before it's reached the posh part of the brain, the cerebral cortices. Because there's a part of the sensory input that goes straight to this limbic system, which has to do with emotion. And this gets onto something I'll get onto a little bit later with Vanderhoop, when he criticized Jung's description of sensation, and he said, and he wrote, sensation is not the only factor in this function. And he renamed it instinct, and he put emotion in it. He renamed it instinct and put emotion in it. So, for example, if we rename sensation something like the artisan instinct or guardian instinct. You get an emotional reaction to that sensory input, and it's bound up with it. Like I said, with the artisans, it's like they're feeling the excitement of the stimulation. They're feeling that rush. It's bound up with it. And Van der Hoek talked about it being a unity. And you have to deal with it together. Now, it's not neat and tidy, but it reflects how the brain works, and it also reflects Kersey. Now, I'm going to get a little bit more on track by... I sort of didn't want to start here, but this is sort of what I wrote about Guardians, like a short bit on Guardians. Nostalgic, quirky, but conventional, by the book, comfortable pace, hard workers who will tell you about their medical problems and bring up health, especially read danger to kids. And then that stuff like that. And then just little bits on Guardian. And then I went a bit weird, where I did a sort of an exaggerated version of an ISTJ collector. And it was a little bit strange. But yeah, word usage. Yeah, orthodox word usage, associative speech, quantitative. But I want to get on track, like to talking more about the function. Because my slides are not in the right order. But I had a problem with, got a new external hard drive and all the links went wrong. And I had to redo those. Okay, so Dario, stabilizing with a predictable standard. Kersey called the leadership style of Guardians stabilizing, the stabilizers. He called their leadership style the stabilizers. And then Linda Behrens, based on feedback from giving temperament courses to people in business, she changed the names of the temperaments. She used Kersey names for the temperaments, but she found that there was pushback from business because all the business people wanted to be rationals. It's because it's like with the sort of the baggage of the names. And so she came up with different names for that reason, for marketing reasons. And she renamed the Guardian stabilizers. And so that sort of saying, and because Dario Nardi was taught by Linda Behrens, part of that stabilizing comes into here. So yeah, this is from Dario Nardi's book, Neuroscience of Personality, 2011, but it's still a good book. The foundations are still the same in Dario Nardi's. The foundations have not changed in Dario Nardi's research. It's just that now he talks about how the different parts of the brain connect together and work together. So it's like that book from 2011, it's still useful. It's just that what has come out lately that is not written up in a new book yet, it just adds to it. And if people want, and people will still be pretty much up to date if they buy both of his books, Neuroscience of Personality and The Magic Diamond, because there's the bit in Magic Diamond on the sort of like the newer bits of his research. So here, Dario's definition of SI: carefully compare situation to the customary ways you've come to rely on, check with past experience, stabilize the situation, and invest for future security. Okay, so let's unpack this in terms of there are some values that are embedded in this. So the value embedded in this is that the person that's using SI strongly very much values security. Customary ways you've come to rely on. Well, why do you want to do it in a customary way? Because you know that works and that's the safe way to do it. So you can see it's a little bit of a small c conservative mentality, of which can be summed up with, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so that conservatism, that small c conservatism, is part of the instinct of the Guardian and going towards security. And Kersey would have it as Guardian seek security. And so that's the motivation and the process. I think Linda Behrens has a bit on, I'll get to that in a moment, about some of the motivational needs for the function, because we can't really think of the function in isolation. There's a motivation bound up with the function because we're describing what I call, it's a bit clunky, sensory instincting. But here we go. And this is Dario when he sort of like a bit more from his brain research. Oh, here we go. And then sort of like he gave two definitions. And this is how it affects the brain. Constant practice helps their brain specialize. Improve when watching a role model or example. Okay, embedded value there. Looking to others for guidance. Looking for that role model is part of the yes, everyone can look for a role model, but guardians have a higher percentage of wanting that role model to emulate somebody else. And so for often in touch with body sensations, yes, that's part of what I would call harmonizing SI. And also those types that have weak SI, so U2NJs, can sometimes go into a state where you're out of touch with your body sensations. Is that correct? Where you're like completely in your head and you forget sort of body sensations. Easy track where you're on a task. This is more a feature of guardians than SI on its own. It's hard to separate it out from the context of the temperament. Use their whole brain to review the past. Okay, strong memory, kinship, and raw details. Yes. Oh yeah, that was an example of another. I found an example of Guardian NE. Family trees. Like this is connected to this. It's like connections on a concrete level. Kinship details. May over rely on authority for guidance. There you go. Over rely on authority because that is part of the instinct. The trusting of authority. So, Jonathan, would you agree with that? That as a fundamental, guardians trust authority?
No.
Elaborate, please.
In my experience, it's more complicated than that.
Well, we're here to learn.
It'll depend a lot on. Remember, it's small C conservative we're dealing with here, so it's not big conservative. It's more like they can be deferential to authority in the situation, but if it's like in private, they may be more reverential. They may be very grumbling, and it may also depend on like. It'll depend a lot on what their politics are. So they're deferential to people of their political persuasions sometimes, right. And yeah, there's many layers to this.
Yeah, what I should have said is that it's that thing a little bit like the 6. The guardian wants an authority to believe in because they find that comforting if they agree with that authority. Now, obviously, when you've got the more, dare I say it, the more worldly, the more intelligent guardians that are not like robots, like and just follow anything that anyone says, but they're still wanting. It's like they want the authority to be good. What I mean is not good. They want the authority to be right so they can follow the authority, so they have something to sort of hang their hat on, to sort of reassure themselves, and it's just more stable that way.
Well, I've said this before, but almost all SJs will have either be 6 or have 6 in there.
Yeah.
So that's a common thing. But as far as what you were just saying, I think some SJs will be more like that than others. Some others will be more still pretty just happy. They'll just think someone should take care of this, and other people, and the rest should just be left to their own devices. People should be, as long as things are going, as long as it's being taken care of, that's not the issue.
Stabilizing the situation.
Yes, like it's not that they've got any special reverence for that. They just think it should be taken care of.
Right.
They make a lot of complaints if it's being done poorly, or if they think it's a waste of time. Like my mum was making a lot of comments about how she had respect for the Queen, she didn't mind the Queen, but this was all kind of nothing to do with her, nothing to do with the family. Didn't really affect anything she knew or anything. So it was like,
Yeah, in general, Guardians, like if you were like to do of the people that were most interested in like monarchies, Guardians, like Kersey wrote about Guardians in the United States being interested in monarchies and the royal family.
well,
It's not. I'm not saying it's fundamental to all flipping Guardians. I'm just saying that there is a tendency of Guardians that of those people that are monarchists in England and Scotland, the percentage of those people who are Guardians will be more than 50%, which is about what the percentage of the population that is Guardian.
yeah, Scottish Guardians will care less about the monarchy than English Guardians. I think it would also depend which part of the country you're living in general. Like maybe
Also the age of the Guardian as well.
well, even then, it's a lot of it's more to do with their experiences. I can also see like certain American NFs or S
Yeah, maybe with a bit of Thor in there as well.
how he reverence the
Yeah,
monarchy.
you know that little bit of different, old special,
Yeah.
like the specialness with the Thor.
Yeah. Perhaps too. But yeah. But yeah, I think it's more complicated than just a simple reference. I remember I had a thought I was gone. Sorry.
Yeah, it's that thinking about authority that, like, in practice, as you rightly pointed out, like in practice, that is a lot more complex, and that it's. But I think it is in line with what you say about the six, where the six wants an authority, and I think the reason why is it's then more comforting, because it's like, so for example, it's the way I feel about Robert McKee. And he's like, so he's written this book, and he's got all of this stuff in, all of these techniques for writing, and to me that's like, oh, that's a guide that gives me something that I can sort of use, that I can rely on, that I can use as a yardstick to measure and think about what I'm doing. When I'm worrying about, oh, is this right, is this good or not, I have something to believe in to measure it against. And I think it's that. But I can also see certain areas where I sort of like have a different opinion on him, like when he gets more into like little bits in characterization, and it's like, but having someone that you can believe in, and it's like, why? Because somebody wants to rely on it, to they want the security in that. Whereas if you had such a person where, if you had a guardian in a situation where there was nothing to believe in, you know what I mean? They need something to hold on to. That's sort of something they can rely on, I suppose, what I'm trying to say. But it's hard to put it right. I might be able to write it in a better explanation, but getting the nuances right. And this, the reason they want the authority is that they believe in the authority. And part of the reason why they believe in authority is that they believe in the process of how somebody got to be an authority. That they that will say, oh, this person went through all of these certifications, they got to this position, and that is why this person should be respected. Now, for the artisans, they look at, they couldn't care less about the title of the person. They look at what can the person do, in terms of like just what it's like, what Dave called it, David Mark Kersey, is, has the person got the chops? Can they do it? Whereas the Guardians are more impressed by the title, because they believe in the title that somebody has achieved. And at least that's the initial deference they would give to somebody with the title. The person then might prove to be a bit of a fool, but it's that initial respect for the title that somebody holds. It's like when certain people say in the United States, you can criticize the president, but you should respect the office of the presidency. You know, that sort of thing. So yeah, in practice, it's a lot more complicated rather than guardians being robotic with authority. But they do tend to take a lot of stuff for granted when it becomes customary. Right then, we flogged that. There's a bit here on the instinct part, because I'd like to get to that. Right. Yeah, about how important the limbic system is with sensing. From a more biological standpoint, the brain's limbic system operates as the mind control area for response to certain stimuli, so sensing, including a variety of instinctual behavior. The limbic system processes external stimuli related to emotions, social activity, and motivation, which propagates a behavioral response. It's not more complicated than just reception, because there's certain stimuli where you get an instant reaction. Say in the area of romance, certain stimuli where it's like, that stimuli is very attractive, that stimuli is repugnant. Or here's an example. There's certain senses which are more emotional than others. Touch is very very much related to emotion. And so even in song lyrics, if you get lyrics related to touch, they're that kinesthetic system. And in NLP, they put kinesthetic sort of together with feelings. Feelings and touch go together as one system in NLP. But there's another one as well. Smell. A certain smell can take you right back with a certain emotional memory, because in the structure of the brain, you've got the olfactory bulb. So olfactory, nose, smell, is next to the amygdala, which has some a function with storing emotional memories. So a certain smell can like take you right back and be very evocative. And in that situation where you smell it and then you get that memory. So what Vanderhoek was saying is like, this is all bound up. The sensory stimulus and your reaction to it, and then your inclination from that is bound together. So for instance, so it's like you smell something, it's like, ugh, you have that reaction. So you've got the sensation, the emotion, and the reaction all sort of works together in a unity. So here, again, these behaviors are influenced by sensory input, sight, sound, touch, and smell. Now, and I did this before, but I can actually give some examples of this. Right, so yeah, the 4 Fs. Yes, fleeing. Much better than saying flight, because not all animals fly. Fleeing. What they should have put is fornicating, not fornication. Get all the consistency with the ings. Right, let's do a bit there about the smell brain. Right, okay. What I should mention here is this. I know I'm being a bit vague so far, but Dario can help me out in a moment. Something he wrote. Right, needs for membership and responsibility. That might be that's part of the instinct to belong, but that lends more towards the SFJs than the STJs. But still, Guardians tend to be the least alienated of all the types, the Guardians, because they're most of the culture. They're the most influenced by the culture around them. They're not like alienated from the culture, which is like, say, INTJ can be. The INTJ can be completely alienated from the culture.
I think subculture is probably more accurate, because again, it'll be that I guess
Probably
about
right, and I have mentioned subculture elsewhere. I'm off form today. Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, subculture. Yeah, so for example, I've been writing a couple of Guardians that end up involved in a criminal subculture, and I find it interesting when a criminal is a Guardian, or rather, when a Guardian is a criminal. This is getting towards the subjective sensing part about the vast data bank of stored images and impressions that informs the decisions that they need to make to preserve the community. So Berens reduces it a bit, but she does that because she writes introductory books. The problem is that we don't have open access to her best writing that is written for a knowledgeable type community. We just get these sort of references every now and then to these sort of clever articles that Linda Berens has written. But the only thing that's really public is her introductory stuff. So we don't really get a sort of an idea of her intellect, because a lot of her stuff is, you have to sort of be within, say, the American Association of Psychological Type to read her articles for that audience to get an idea of the level that she's at, rather than just judging her by what she's written in these introductory materials. Because she even said that this book, this is of a published work, this is probably the least reader friendly, because it's probably too intellectual of her books. And that was the book, she called it her best functions book, but people didn't understand it for an introductory course. It was called Dynamics of Personality Type. And Dario sent me the PDF of it, and it has got some good little things in there. And it's interesting that I compared her description. I thought her description of some of her functions, I thought she described better than Dario. Anyway, so I'm going to need to make my case, and the best way I can do that is with this graphic, which I should have started with. I should have started with this, because I can make my point about instinct. So Dario Unardi was taught by Linda Berens. I mean, they're equals now, and basically Linda Berens has gone into retirement now because she's in her 70s, but they worked together literally for decades. Dario first was taught by Linda in 1994, and they started working together and publishing books in 1999.
Well, I think Linda Berens still teaches, though.
A little bit, but she's sort of in semi-retirement. She's sort of handed over to her daughter.
Yeah.
She's an ENFJ, taking over the business. And for a long time, I think her business was called the Temperament Research Institute. But my point here is that, so Dario Nardi, very much influenced by Linda Berens and working together with Linda Berens, and Linda Berens was very much influenced by David Kersey. So I see myself as like Linda Berens in that for her, functions were very much influenced by temperament, and I'm the same way. That that it's like functions are subordinated to temperament, especially when you're dealing with concrete types. And so all of this, I showed this stuff to David Mark Kersey, and he said that all of this was consistent with the temperament. But what I'm trying to say to folks is that, so here for artisans, and I'm just doing, then I'll go to Guardians in a moment, because we are supposed to be talking about SI. The point is, when I call this sensory instincting, and this will be extroverting or empirical sensory instincting. Look, he's got it there. Follow your gut instincts, exciting, impulses, action, thrill, exciting. Do you see what I mean? Emotion is in the function that Dario is defining. And I suggested to Dario, why don't you rename it? And I think at the time I suggested you call it instincting. It's more than sensing. And Linda Berens has said, sensing is more than the five senses. So this is more than just reception. This is more than just sensory acuity. Instinct, exciting, thrill. the emotional reaction to the sensory input is part of SE there. Now, guardian instinct, SI, or what I shall call the guardian instinct, which is most prominent in the Guardians. So the SJ is the SI wheelhouse types, the SI DOMs, and those that are SI auxiliary, which will be ESTJ and ESFJ have SI second, and ISFJ and ISTJ have SI first. You both know that. I'm just saying that for the audience. So here, this, to me, this is a checklist for SI, but it reads like me as a checklist for being a Guardian. So the way what Dario has done is he has defined SI as your guardianness, as your guardian function. And he has defined SE as your artisan function. And so within this, there's an instinct. And the instinct is towards follow the work, ideas, and examples of others who have come before you. That's part of that instinct, that deference to others and looking for an authority, wanting an authority, what you are accustomed to. And then we dig deeper. Why do you go with what you're accustomed to? Because you're comfortable with it. Why are you comfortable with it? Because you know what it works. So it's like if you were to ask a guardian, well, why do you do it like that? Because it works. I'm just like, you have to follow up, and then you would get to the sort of the nub of it. I do it because I know it works. I can trust it. So again, that small c conservatism of going to what has worked because they can trust it, and wanting to avoid things going wrong. And because going wrong is not exciting for the Guardian, it's stressful for the Guardian. They want to eliminate the stress. They want to keep it secure. They want to stabilize the situation. And again, here, look at certain words or words with the same root, which like accustomed, customary, and then feel inclined. Like I said, you've got feel inclined to put a stop to something new to your experience. That's not just sensing. I mean, so the case I'm making is there's so much instinct in this. I don't like the word sensing because it's more than sensing going on. Feel inclined to put a stop to something new to your experience. In emergencies, trust solutions that have stabilized the situation in the past. Now, because of this motivation to go with what has worked in the past, that draws on memory. And so the function, a lot of people out there will say that memory is SI or SI is memory. No. It's just that SI will draw on memory so for example, SI wants to take few risks and be consistent with not to be consistent with the past for being consistent with the past's sake, but to be consistent with the past because not to be consistent with the past, to be consistent with what has worked before, to be consistent with what has worked, because then I'm less likely to go wrong and I want to get it right. Conservative, ultra conservative. It's like Bill Cowher when he was coach of Pittsburgh Steelers. When he's ahead, get ultra conservative, just run the ball, like reducing risk. Small c conservatism, reducing risk to an absolute minimum. Risk avoidant, very, very conservative with a strong search for security and safety. That is part of that instinct. Trust solutions that stabilize the situation in the past. Yes, because they worked in the past. And so Guardians have this past focus because they have a focus on what has worked. And so it draws on SI in order to do it. Whereas SE is about artisans are about the here and the now. And so that draws on what is happening in the moment and all of the nuances in the present situation. So where the guardians of, so for example, one of the ways to differentiate between an SE experience and SI experience is that if you were to bring 10 SE DOMs from, let's say 10 ESTPs from around the world, different cultures, and you'd have them evaluate the present experience or respond to the present experience, there would not be much difference between their experience because they would focus on the empirical details of what the situation is in front of them. If you brought 10 ISTJs from around the world, you'd get greater difference between their experience because it was all being subjectified by their past experience. And it's like one guardian might be remembered, something in the sensory experience might remind that guardian of something else that they liked, another one something that they hated. And because it's more subjective, there's going to be more difference between those SI DOMs because it's a subjectifying function. Again, here, to find what's reliable, value, reliability. Why do people want reliability? Because they are afraid of stuff going wrong and they really, really, really want it to go right. Artisans, they might even say, oh, that's boring. They might even want things to go wrong. I mean, seriously, in a work environment, if you have an artisan and it's like, if you'd have given them a choice and say, right, everything can go right today, and it's like, but you don't have to do much, but if something goes wrong, a lot of them actually like secretly, you put them on the truth serum, they want something to go wrong because, oh, something's happening, something different. Let's respond to this. And so this is where it's like, from an evolutionary point of view, when you're doing the stable stuff, guardians are the people who are best there to do the same old thing again and again and do the same. If you've got a crisis situation, artisans are the best people to in a crisis because they can think on the feet and they're stimulated by the crisis. Guardians can be frozen by a crisis because they are used to doing things the same old way and they're not as good as improvising. And Linda Behrens changed the name of artisan to the improvisers. Again, here we've got comfortable pace. So that's part of the SI harmonizing, I would think. So doing something at a comfortable pace. So comfort, customary, accustomed. Do you see what I mean? It's very small C conservative stuff here. And it's not just subjective sensor. It's not just this. Oh, there's a quote here from, I thought this was quite interesting. Would you like to read it out, Jonathan, and then give me your comment on it? So it's from this Eckhart Tolle person, because I think there's some...
I wish I knew what it sounded like, so I did this, but
random European intellectual.
Okay, I'm not even going to attempt that. When you become comfortable with uncertainty, infinite possibilities open up in your life. It means fear is no longer a dominant factor in what you do and no longer prevents you from taking action to initiate change. The Roman philosopher Tacitus rightly observed that the desire for safety stands against every great and noble enterprise. If uncertainty is unacceptable to you, it turns into fear. If it is perfectly acceptable, it turns into aliveness, alertness, and creativity.
This is the opposite of guardians.
The
opposite of the guardian point of view. This is the values. And so here you could say you've got people who are valuing NE more and SE more.
I kind of regret that video we did on Hitler saying he was an ENFJ because Hitler had a really good memory and he liked things a certain way.
But Jonathan, I now conceive of the that function as binary, all or nothing. So, for example, you can have ENFJs and ENTJs who are health nuts. It's that all or nothing thing about it. It's like with affect display with INTJs and ISTJs.
Yeah.
I think I think it's also fairer to the function as well to describe it as binary. There's just less nuance over its use. Whereas if you see an FE DOM, so if you compare FE DOMs, say you compare the FE use, or rather, just compare the affect display of an FE DOM to the affect display of an ISTJ and an INTJ. You'll see how much more nuanced the affect display is of the FE DOM compared to the INTJ and ISTJ, where the emotions tend to be more on or off. It's more like clear lines and distinct. There's less of that nuance in it. And it's like that for all of the functions. Everyone's dominant function is the most differentiated function. It's the most nuanced function. And it's like, and also thinking about it in terms of binary, it's a little fairer to the types, and it allows me to think about the types in less stereotypical ways. So, for example, if you think of an ESTP, an ESTP has no FI. But if you think of the ESTP as FI binary, then it's like, well, there are certain situations where they become hurt, and it's like it will switch on, and there's not a lot of understanding in that area. But this like switching on and off, this like all or nothing, almost black and white part of the polar function. Like an example I give, where like for INFPs and INTPs, we can overreact. Either not react at all and be completely accommodating and passive and intimidated, or overreact. Or so rattled. So it's like, I don't know why you're smiling, Jonathan. But
I was just thinking, I'm proud of you for not saying much about Putin these days, because I remember when the Syria thing happened, you were convinced that you were worried that World War II was about to break out, and now you're not thinking of anything. You haven't brought it up, at least to me. Maybe,
well, I mean,
maybe I've just triggered you right there, but I don't know.
We could bring up Poot later on, but like with him, there's an example about how complicated it can be. Like, he's a counterphobic 6. I see fear in his eyes. Do you agree he's a counterphobic 6?
Yeah.
But get into this about risk. And so, okay, at the moment, okay, we can give him as an example. He is extremely conservative when it comes to economics. He is very, very stingy. I've been following the Russian defense industry for a long time. In the Russian military, when I used to be very, very left-wing as well, I was interested in it for that reason. I'm just interested in Russian technology and the progress of Russia. He is extremely conservative for 2 reasons. One, you've got the temperament factor of him being ISTJ. And the second reason, that his life experience has reinforced his temperament. Because in the 1990s, Russia had hyperinflation through not being fiscally disciplined. So from his point of view, because naturally guardians, if you put them in a position where they'll say, if you were to say, would a guardian save money? If a guardian can save money, they will save money. If an artisan can save money, they'll likely spend it instead. There's more than likely to spend it, especially if they're a 7. But the point is with Putin, that a lot of years, he would cut the defense budget, cut programs in the defense budget to balance the budget. And not just balance the budget, but to have a rainy day fund. So very conservative, very risk avoidant. And then, like, not wanting to do a mobilization, not having enough troops, what's going on. But anyway, Jonathan has baited me. And now I'm going to go on. I guess. So we did that. Right. Yeah, I'll talk about that. So how SI is different from the other ones. So, yeah. So you've got to hear about the possibilities, because people with high SI have low NE. Like SI DOMs are inferior NE, which in my model is the seventh strongest function. So it's like it's the last but one in terms of strength. There's only one more function weaker than NE in the SI DOMs, and that's TE and ISFJ and FE and ISTJ. So you can see there's a distinction between. So think about how these are opposites. You got the SI instinct, which is to do something the same old way, and then you've got NE. Oh, we could do it like this, or like this, or like this, or like this. All these different ways and alternatives. But the SI wants to stick with how it's always been done, because that's the safe way to do it. What are you amused by, Jonathan? Okay. All right then. So that's how SI is opposite to
Sorry,
NE.
I didn't realize I was muted. I was thinking of something else. I'm sorry.
Right. Okay. Right. Throwing me off. So, and also SI is opposite from SE in terms of now versus past, but not really. The main opposition between the two is a situation that the Guardian will see as risky, the Artisan will see as exciting. They won't even see it as risky. They'll see it as exciting. Excitement versus risk. And so there's kind of an opposition there. And also you've got SI is opposite from NI in terms of development, developing. How can this be improved versus the SI? I want to keep it the same because I trust what I know. And I'm going to stabilize the situation. So stabilizing is opposite from developing. And so you can get these things where people get stuck in their ways. Why? Because those ways work. Those ways are trusted. I trust those ways. I know how to do those ways. Where the NI is thinking about, especially NTJs, how can they change it to improve it? And they've got that development part of NI. So I'm happy with, maybe it's an INTP part of me. The NTP part of me likes the idea of getting all of these definitions to be opposites, but opposites in ways that I can point at. I can give concrete examples of, I can say NJs tend to be interested in development, either of projects involving machines or people. I can point at these things and give examples. And it's like, it's nice that there's these little oppositions in the way the functions are defined, that we see at the whole type level. And it makes me more secure in, so this might be like what I talked about with Jonathan yesterday off air, about maybe having some security in TI assertive, like this idea of, I mean, there's no reason why these functions should be opposites, but it's sort of comforting that you've got these neat oppositions between these functions. It makes me believe in those more because they have these neat oppositions. And it's like, so you can say, for each of these, you can say how it differs in 3 different ways from the other 3. So for SI, it's about stabilizing, keeping it the same. NI is about developing. SI versus keeping it the same, not versus developing it, but by doing something else, a different alternative. Well, I'm not interested in those alternatives. I'm interested in this thing now. And then you've got the sort of like the taking the risks and the audacity and the excitement of SE versus the being safe and small c conservative with SI. So you can show how they're different from the other 3. And that makes me think that I'm more comfortable in a definition that has clear distinctions from the other 3 definitions. So, Jonathan, is that an NTP thing? Like wanting these neat oppositions?
Well, We should probably ask Hailey that. Does Hailey feel like it's a NT thing?
Oh, sorry, I meant NTP.
Oh, NTP. Okay.
Sorry, Hailey, I will bring you in.
Yeah, I guess they do more so INTP than ENTP would want the clear definitions, but yeah.
Yeah,
They
because
both.
we know how socionics takes it way too far.
So they always take everything way too far.
Yeah, but because what socionics would do, just to digress, is it would have contradictions between definitions of things that you can't point at. In this, I can point at these things. I can say NFJs are interested in the development of people and their psychology. I can say that NTJs are interested in the development, and I can say, well, where did you get that from, Ben? Well, it's also from Kelsey. And it's like you can see these socially intelligent roles. You can see it. You can see it in the behavior of NPs switching things, doing different, but there's also some overlap there with SE, where the SE people, the artisans like to switch it up as well. But the Guardians do like to stay with the same thing and what has worked in the past. And again, ethos. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. You could say the ethos of the other ones might be, how boring. Well, bore me to death, the artisans might say. The NEs might be like, yeah, but couldn't you try this when there's something better? It's like, no, the NPs are most likely to try and reinvent the wheel, especially the NTPs. Reinvent the wheel. Right then. So that's sort of given some frameworks for SI. This is something that Berens did for, right, stabilizer temperament. So, Hailey, have you got any comments or questions so far? Okay. Jonathan, would you like to read this out and stop and comment on it for like any bits that you might think are a little bit reductionist? Or
The core needs are for group membership and responsibility. I find that reductionist. I think common, but not like universal. Even though they're doing a responsible thing, the values to build. A lot of this is social instinct stuff in the Enneagram, so it's entire, like almost all of it is. So let's say it's common for SJs to be social first or second, but social last ones can exist, I think.
it's hard to find a guardian that's rubbish at the social instinct.
Yeah. Usually they're at least passable.
Yeah. That's like what I see with like ISTJs and INTJs. That the eyes that it's interesting to compare certain types in terms of the binary function. So it's like in general, I would say ISTJs are better integrated into society than INTJs, and it has the big help that half of society is guardian. So it's easier for ISTJ to fit in.
Yeah, I think INTJs that are more socially inclined, responsible, tend to want to change things, and they're more inclined to change things than the average. SJs can change things though, but usually,
And as they move through their career, NTs usually get into contact with more NTs, especially if they have to go into like a STEM career, they're going to get in contact with more NTs.
Yeah, I have this theory that female INTJs that are involved in like STEM are more likely to get involved in feminism just because they're encountering too many men and too much male stuff. That's making
Wait a minute, what was that, Jonathan? An INTJ with a sexual instinct becomes a feminist to meet women.
No, that's it. Female INTJs.
Oh, female INTJs
Who are involved in STEM are more likely to encounter guys with certain attitudes, and they're more likely to become feminists as a result of wishing there was more women around that were also NTs. That's a theory that
Yeah, a little bit of that. I mean, but there's certain subjects where I think we know there's like this is not well. I'm thinking, where are the female NTs? Like in terms of military stuff. Like I'm interested in military technology. Where are the female NTs? Where are the like? There's hardly any women interested in it.
That's funny. I've actually been in a site where there's a woman who social. It's that site Quora. Do you know it? You ask questions.
Sorry, was it?
Quora, Quara,
No.
Quora. Sorry.
Oh, Cure. Oh, yes, Cure.
Quora.
Yeah, I've answered some questions on there about typology once or twice.
Yeah, there's a woman there who's, I think she's from Finland, and she says that she's an INTJ, and she was in fact in the army. I think she said it's because she was kind of pressured into it by her parents, and she didn't necessarily fit in, but she did benefit from it. I think she got into chemical engineering or something. I don't think she's part of it anymore. And I think also in Finland it's also the case that you have conscription, so that was another part of it. But I think it was her job for a while, and she said she's INTJ a few times.
I think there is a higher. I mean, as a general observation, I would say that those women that are interested in STEM stuff are more likely to be in it than just the person that's casually interested in it. They actually have it as a job. Like, so for example, if I see a woman on a defense site and she's interested in military technology, she probably works in the defense industry or something. There's more for that reason. It's like there's a practical rather than just boys and their toys sort of thing. Because I do think like this is not representative of the distribution of types. Like, and even when you see Linux things, like it's like there's more female NTs than this. And it's like there's like 1% of the Linux meeting is female.
Yeah.
Right then. But I think there's just sort of generally less nerdiness. I think there's a high degree of nerdiness amongst males, which maybe can relate it to the higher incidence of autism amongst males compared to females, which is genetic.
I just wanted to interject. I mean, I would purposefully go to the math and science tutoring section because that's where I found my kin. I mean, I used to go there to talk specifically with, I don't even know what his actual title was, but I would go there and we would just talk for hours. And among the NT guys that I've known, and of course this is N equals 1 doesn't mean anything, but I found that a lot of NT guys on average compared to other people I've known tend to see me for me and not my exterior. So that's just interesting. I
think that's because NT guys in general are focused on someone's intellect.
Yeah. Well, compared to other types, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where was I? What was I saying?
Sense of community, value, stability, security, sense of community.
Yeah. Maybe surprised one of those go against these social structures. Again, that goes back to the small C conservative, and depending what your politics were growing up. I'm living in the west of Scotland. That's a more left-wing working class area of Scotland. So that's going to be a bit. That's definitely
exactly
where you are.
It's like if you've grown up in a union household and you're a guardian, then that's going to be used. There's going to be what your subculture is, and you're going to be a real ardent advocate of trade union rights and trade unionism, which is what is normal to you.
Well, I wouldn't say unionist, trade union stuff, just a generic working class.
Yeah, but just an example of it's not a case that small C conservatives are big C conservatives, that all guardians are conservative. It's just that it depends on the upbringing. Because it's about security. It's security because there's security in being in a union. Definitely. There is security in the welfare state. And that applies to, because from a voter's point of view, the welfare state, because you're a guardian, the welfare state will appeal to all guardians because it's offering security. And it's the same with the union. The union can do this for you. security in the union and belonging to a union. So you can see reasons for it by appealing to guardians.
I remember someone saying that they were an anarchist and an ESTJ, but they said it makes sense because their parents were anarchists and they grew up in an anarchist household, so that's why they're still an anarchist.
Yeah, it can make sense.
Did that years ago.
Also, if the government around you is complete trash, then I don't blame them. Because there might be, well, I like the idea of government in theory. If we had a decent, properly run one, then they would be in favour of it.
Yeah. There's also, a lot of people say that Stalin was a ESTJ, and obviously he was a revolutionary too. I've also
I forgot. Did you type him as an 8 or count of favourite 6?
An 8.
Right.
Yeah. Catherine also thinks that Lenin was an ESTJ, which I'm not sure, but anyway, people of this temper cooperative actions with a focus on standards and norms. I'd say that's a bit more accurate.
Right.
But also that can be active or passive. If you're emphasizing the SI, the comfort-seeking side of SI, it's not necessarily going to be as obvious, but it'll still be kind of there, like the difference between not going with the group or just not going against the group.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. It's not some SJs will be very for group, others will just be more with group and going on with it.
Yeah.
Grudgingly, but it's rare for them to actively go against the group unless they've already got a group unless that's part of their upbringing or something.
Yeah, because so much of their values come from their group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Their orientation is to past experience, they like things sequenced structured. They have practical applications of what they're learning.
I'll just say that something about that. There's I in the 90s, I'm showing my age, but in the late 90s I watched a series presented by Professor Robert Winston, and he talked about 2 evolutionary strategies that have sort of had a big impact on human nature. One was the cooperative instinct, and you see the benefit of that. I call it the societal instinct, of the benefit of people working together and being cooperative, and you see the benefit of that. And it's like, okay, that correlates well to the guardians. And then you've got the more of this selfish or competitive instinct. And you see these 2 strains in human nature of the person who is mainly competitive and more self-focused. But the downside of that is less connection to other people that can help you. If you're thinking in extreme, the ISTP. Oh, they did a bit with in the Book of Boba, where it's like and with
the Star Wars Boba Fett.
Yeah, and the Mandalorian, where it said, I've learned that being on your own. They said something like, I've learned that independence can only take you so far. And it's almost like, an ISTP has got to a point where he's learning some FE. Right, because it's like having to form these alliances with other people. Because ISTPs have piss poor FE. They've got 7 slot FE. And they're very much about being independent. And it's like, I see the Mandalorian and Boba Fett as ISTPs. It's like when you, and the second half of the Book of Boba, the final 3 episodes, it's like watching Mandalorian. And I think the makers even called Book of Boba Mandalorian 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it's very ISTP. Mandalorian comes across as a little bit more guardianish because for him, there's like this is the way kind of stuff, like following the tradition. But that's like the FE binary I see for him. Whereas Boba Fett is much more ISTP. Or STP. So again, that's sort of like the Baron's sort of reduced version of SI.
They tend to look for the practical applications, what they were, and I'd say that's the thing I agree with the most.
Right.
I think even the more intellectually curious ones would be more.
Ooh, But I would also say that that's artisans as well would look for the practical
I'd
applications
say,
of what they.
yeah,
That's
I'd
an
say
ST thing. I think that's an
Or,
ST thing.
or even just a sensory thing in general. Perhaps.
Even
Then
NTJs as well.
maybe it's,
Hailey's going to be looking at like what is the practical application of what I'm learning. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe it's just thinkers are boring, practical people, and us feelers we actually follow our genuine intellectual curiosity.
Yeah. But INTP is not as much. Like they tend to look for the practical. I mean, they learn for that, but their first instinct is it interesting? What are the possibilities? But because like I say to these people, INTPs can have good TE. Just think of all the INTPs that work in the STEM field. You got to use TE in the STEM field.
Mm-hmm.
So here's how Jung did. It is a bit of how Jung did SI, and then I'm going to sort of bring it together and show my subfunctions of SI, which I eventually came up with after years of being annoyed by different definitions of SI.
Just to be clear, that's not Jung, that's Freud. I know that you know that, Ben, but
right.
Just in case.
And it says it there.
Yes, but I mean, for a brief second, I thought that was Jung, and then I went,
okay.
Yeah. So if I did that, I want everyone else to feel just as
okay. Okay. So far, I've been going over a definition of SI, which is like, for lack of a better term, the sort of like the definition of SI that everyone sort of uses in the type community. That's not a socionics person. It's like this, like essence of guardian thing. Like this kind of like SI that makes you sort of small c conservative, risk avoidance, seeking security sort of stuff. But there are other flavors of SI that are related to it. And this is like the original version. This is Jung's version, which is subjective sensing. So this emphasis. This is what I would call the imaginative subfunction of SI. So I'll read through this. Sensation 2 has a subjective factor. So there you go, subjective. Like I would tell people, Jung meant by introverted, subjective, and extroverted, empirical. It's well, the way he kept using the word objective, but what he meant by objective was empirical. It's just that objective's got three meanings. Okay. Sensation 2 has a subjective factor, which besides the sensed object, there is a sensing subject who adds his or her subjective disposition to the objective stimulus. That was an odd noise. Was that whose odd noise was that?
I think that was my stomach. I am so sorry.
It was just funny. It was like a weird. It was like that. It was like wooden. It was like an open door. It was like a door opening. Right.
You're going to make a clip out of this, aren't you?
I might do if you give me permission. Right, 1 hour, 8 minutes. 8 minutes in for clip. Thanks for the idea, Jonathan. Right. Yes. So again, this subjective part. So subjective. The full INTP name: subjective, sensory, instinctive. Here we go. If, for instance, several painters were to paint the same landscape, each painting will be different from the others, chiefly because of different ways of seeing. Yeah, so different ways of seeing, the subjective part. This is why I gave the example of 10 SI DOMs looking at an experience and comparing that to 10 SE DOMs. There would be more agreement between the SE DOMs than between the SI DOMs, because the subjective factor would come in for the SI DOMs, and each SI DOM would have a different subjective factor because of their different past histories, past experience. In other words, for SI, past experience modifies the present experience more than it does for SE DOMs. Now, everyone's present experience is modified by their past experience, but for SE DOMs, it's much less so than for Guardians. For Guardians, much more of their present experiences run through the filter of their past experience in how they understand what they are sensing in their perceptions. The SE DOMs are more about the actual here and now, the actual features of the sensory experience. But everyone has to rely on past experience to interpret the present in order to understand something. It's just a matter of degree. If, for instance, several painters were to paint the same landscape, each painting will be different from the others, chiefly because of different ways of seeing. Oh yeah, so an example of this kind of painter would be Vermeer. This is it was very good technique, Vermeer, Dutch painter Vermeer. Van der Hoop came up with the example of Vermeer. Chiefly because of different ways of seeing. He concerns himself with the subjective perception excited by the objective stimulus. The decisive thing is not the reality of the object, but the reality of the subjective factor, which constitutes a psychic mirror world. Introverted situation does not so much reproduce the object as spread over it, age-old subjective experience and the shimmer of events still unborn. Going a bit weird, getting your NI in there, Carl, even though you're 90p. But it's all based on his experience, so I'm still sticking to my INTP categorization of Jung. He may be conspicuous for his calmness and passivity, or for his rational self-control. Yeah, it's like the Janus in the SI Dom. The too low is raised a little, the too high is lowered, enthusiasm is dampened down, extravagance restrained. But the point there is to think about the subjective factor, the sensory imagination. So there's that aspect. So when we get to my subfunctions, so what I had was, we have 3 definitions of SI from the type community. We have this stuff from Dario Nardi, sort of like, this is your essence of Guardian stuff. This is what most people think of SI in the MBTI community. And I'm glad they do, because the MBTI community, whether they like it or not, has been influenced a lot by Kersey's notions of the artisan and the guardian. They'll talk about, even if they've never read Kersey, they'll still say SPs and SJs. They'll still use those terms, SPs and SJs, and that comes from Kersey. So that definition of SI, and yes, they might mention memory and stuff, but basically it's like this. The common definition of SI that you see people use on the YouTube channels and on Facebook, it's this kind of stuff. But then the Jungians will get annoyed with them, and the Jungians, it's this kind of SI, the subjective sensing part of SI, the imaginary part of SI, the sort of the unique, the idiosyncratic perception of something that is different, experience of something rather, because of your own unique experience. You might hear, you say you go into a song, you hear a song and it reminds you, and you've met the love of your life when you had that song, and it has special resonance for you because of all these associations. There's a subjective meaning, and somebody else might hear the same song, and that song might have been playing in the background when they broke up with somebody, and it's like they have a different reaction to it because of all these subjective factors. So there's this part from Jung. Then we've got this part from socionics, and Victor Galenka calls it comfort sensor. 3 definitions of SI. And for ages, I was annoyed. And it was like, well, they all seem to be true. There's truth in all of these 3 definitions of SI. How can I bring together these definitions of SI? And so I brought them together under this idea of subfunctions. But before I get back to that, I'm just going to do a bit on Van der Hoop. Because Van der Hoop, in 1937, the English translation by Laura Hutton, this is his definition of SI, that sounds like Kersey. But not Kersey when Kersey was 16, because he would have been 16 in 1937. So these are the bits of SI. This is his SI DOM profile. It depends upon the extent to which he is stirred whether a given experience will make a big impression on him, not upon the intensity of the sensation itself. Okay, so that's about the subjective factor. This might be a bit more like ISTJ, monosyllabic reserve. Here we go. This is the bit that is. I'll look at some Guardian stuff. Ponderous caution. Attached to all kind of minor details. Here we go. The advantages and disadvantages of this type are well brought out by the reserved and conservative farmer, with care, comfort sensor, for his land and beasts, and his tendency to carry on everything down to the smallest detail in the same old way. That's Kersey. But Kersey never read this bloody book, and I'm annoyed by that. Passive resistance to anything new. Sound like a Kersey Guardian? Jonathan? Minutest detail. Plants and animals, care. What else? Got some more.
I will say.
I'll go back to it in case you wish to see it.
Yeah, that passive resistance to anything new. There's definitely Guardians who, have that strong any suggestive and they want stuff. But I am thinking of one in particular.
Oh, sorry, I just noticed there. One moment. Dario called his SI chapter Cautious Protector.
Right.
That's in Magic Diamond.
Yeah. Some ISJs have that suggestive NE, but it's like
yeah, like Kristen. I'll just say Kristen's got a lot of NE.
Yeah.
And I would say she's the most creative Guardian I've seen.
Yeah. Sometimes though it's like they want help with the NE, they want other people to provide it. And they're still a bit cautious around it. So there's still a desire for novelty sometimes. I don't know if that's more ISFJ than ISTJ. Wonder if ISTJ is a little bit more.
Yeah, that's why I get one thing that sort of like is a negative to this profile is that sometimes you can say, "Oh, that's more ISFJ, that's more ISTJ." With this profile, I wish you would split it up a bit more. But some of these other things. Well, here we go. So this might be more ISTJ. A good mastery of the technical side of their calling, but that means special underestimate rather than overestimate themselves. Yeah, especially if they're an SI Dom, they're likely to have a 6 in there. Difficulty in understanding their own potentialities and worth. You can get that with SI Doms, definitely. Low self-esteem, low, like again, it's the 6, isn't it? It's this might be a bit more bit in the E9 maybe in this. Little inclination to activity, never readily depart from their routine. More Guardian stuff. So completely different from Jung's. There's little bits in Jung's SI profile where he hints towards the SI Dom doing things in the same old way because doing something new is consistent with inferior NE. There's little bits in the Jung profile, but it's not like Jung's SI Dom profile is like a Guardian. He concentrates on that idea of the subjective vision of the artist, but then he says, but most of the people who are SI Doms are not artists. But this is like a modern description of a Guardian in that it's Guardian temperament stuff. Here we go. This might interest you, Jonathan. So if you read through that, I'd like to get your comment on that because there might be a little bit of 6 in there.
Where am I starting?
26. Yeah.
Oh. The development.
So it's probably describing ISTJ here.
The development of reason also follows the same lines here as the general attitude to life. Facts are its point of departure, and particularly certain fundamental facts which are subjected to exact and thorough investigation. That does sound more ST than that. Observations and ideas are matter of fact and clear. There's nothing contemplative about people of this type. I don't think that's fair.
Yeah.
Moreover, they prefer to stick to the familiar. And
yeah, but you got to remember though that Van der Hoek was INTP, so compared to an INTP, it overanalyzes a lot of things.
Moreover, they prefer to stick to the familiar and find it difficult to adopt anything new. Probably a bit too far as well.
Yeah.
This is connected with their need to see things in a clear setting. If they can bring themselves to accept the new, they occupy themselves with it until it becomes absolutely clear to them. Here is revealed the obstinacy of instinct. It is ever a new attack until it has learned to control its object. Circumstances, however, have to be favourable. In a more abstract matters, they find it difficult to form an opinion of their own and follow those authorities, which, by knowledge of facts, give them the impression of being thorough. Even so, they do not feel any confidence and are easily upset if drawn to discussion in this field, or the value of their authorities is questioned. On the other hand, they have few prejudices and their view on things as common temperaments. Well, I don't know if that you can see that contradicts the thing about having few prejudices and make contradict things like wanting things to be the same and
Yeah.
authorities a bit.
I think Vanderhook was a little bit. I think he was religious. Like you could argue, he was a little bit conservative. Vanderhook, like you might think of him like as I would if I was to type him, I might do him as a normalizing subtype. But then again, I might type him as a normalizing subtype of INTP. Because he was able to come up with these interesting distinctions that Jung missed. No attempt to adaptation is made. Reminds him of home. So that's part of the SI, the subjective sensing part. There we go. Oh, here we go. This is interesting. This amuses me a tiny bit. If it's NF stuff, he wants the leading NF experts, the leading experts on the NF matters, the leading spirits on matters. I thought that was funny. Like if it's going to get mystical with them, who is the expert in this area? On this mystical stuff. So you could have a guardian in a culture where mystical stuff is normalized. Say it's in one of those tribes in, say, Far East of Russia, or certain cultures. Say the Far East of Russia, where they actually do quite some shamanism and stuff like that. And if that's the cultural norm, the guardians would look towards, say, the NF people.
I'd say SFJs are a bit more open to things like astrology and so on than the STJs. So you get that. And also, I'd say that priests are often SJs. I think a lot of priests are likely SJs, so there'll be a certain element of that as well.
I think one of the reasons why they might be into it is they're trying to reduce. I said that thing before about someone to hang their hat on. It's like someone who will tell them what will happen because they worry a lot, and it's like to give them a sense of this is the path to go along. If we do this, it will be okay. Or they do have some fatalism in them. I'm sort of jabbering on a little bit, trying to find a point. I'm not quite there, so you can see here that Vanderhoof's description of the SI Dom is basically like Guardian. So, getting back to this definition, so we have a couple of sources that sort of support this sort of view of. So what I call that like the core SI, like Dario's definition, the cozy temperament of Guardians. What we sort of saw there from Vanderhook, wanting to do things in the same old way because that's the safe way, and trusting safety, being risk averse, all that small c conservatism. That's all part of the core of SI. Habit, routine, orthodoxy. I should have expanded this a bit better, but you know what I mean? Seeking the security, small c conservative, that stuff. And then with the subfunctions, we have. What's that? Yeah, I'll just do that. So with the subfunctions, where this now, certain of the guardians are more likely to use this than others. So ESTJ is most likely to use the assertive subfunction of SI, where it's like, and I think it is assertive. It's like, I'm going to take over this situation to stabilize it. to bring it in line with how it should be. Now, that's another tell about Guardians. They use the word should a lot. You should do it like that. There's these all of these shoulds, how it should be done. The conventional way of doing it. You don't do it like that. You should. A lot of shoulds. And artisans don't like the word should. They don't. Again, so it's like this would be more like, yeah, and even if using it on yourself, self-discipline, you are asserting it on yourself. It's like to what worked in the past. If you're using it assertively and sort of like changing the situation to bring it in line, asserting yourself on the situation, and especially doing it to other people, especially like ESTJs that are enforcing the rule and getting people to as Kersey would say, enforce standard operating procedure, making people do something, do some verb rather, the right way. And so, yeah, and I've put here, even ISFJ, Sith, can and will say, you don't do it like that. As your mother said that, Jonathan? You don't do it like that. Has she ever told to you, you don't do it like that, you do it like this?
Yeah, a little bit.
So even it's like they're asserting it. That's not the way to do it. This is the way to do it. And again, I think this is most used by ESTJ because ESTJ is the most assertive Guardian, and they can be 8s, ESTJs. So he's stabilizing. So you could say Stalin used quite a bit of this assertive SI with some assertive SE as well and some assertive TE.
I still said there's Wonder Stalin or something else though.
Right.
He was a poet after all. Yeah. Yes, when ESTJs be poets.
Well, depends. What was the upbringing like?
By just being stereotypical right now. I'll be super.
Well, I mean, wait a minute. We know Jamie. I won't say the surname, but we know Jamie and we know Natalie. So both ISFJs, and they both write poetry. So there's a part of that where, like SIFI, where it's the sensory part of poetry. It's the what Pat Patterson would call object writing, where you're writing about going towards the sensory details.
You want me to bring up Stalin's poetry and see what we think of it?
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to get these little wrinkles, but it's like, I mean, you know that you said that his upbringing was. Anyway, we did 2 videos on Stalin, folks. Go over there and look at those. We did a lot about. Jonathan talks a lot about his upbringing, but here. So what I'm saying here is,
go on. One short poem. The pinkish bud has opened, rushing to the pale blue violet, and stirred by the light breeze, the lily of the valley has bent over the grass.
Now, the lily of the valley.
That's the beginning of the poem, anyway.
Right. Yeah, but again, it's like, it's sensory stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's, I mean, you'd have to like research, like think, okay, what was the typical day in the life like for Joseph Stalin at that age? What were his other options?
Well, he was doing that. He was involved in some rough hooliganism stuff and reading a lot and that sort of thing. Maybe some politics. He was quite young when he wrote that. This is a teenager. Romantic poetry.
In fact, poetry might be a good example because not many people make a living in poetry. Most people are doing poetry at an amateur level. So it's not got the factor of, oh, the Guardian isn't doing it because they can't make it into a career. Because again, risk averse Guardians. So
yeah. That was dedicated to a local Georgian prince.
I think ISFJs in particular can write
Oh yeah, I'm just
poetry.
I know I'm just bringing up the fact here we have an ESTJ a guy who might have been ESTJ who wrote poetry.
It's possible. That suggests the FI in theory is, I see it as suggestible.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's going to be not normal, but it's these little quirks are possible. So, in trying to bring together these three definitions of SI, I'll test you, Jonathan. What are the three definitions of SI?
You mean the three aspects of it, or
Well, the three definitions that are out there.
well, one's about comfort seeking.
Yep.
One's about
What we get from Socionics focuses on comfort sensing. Yeah.
One's about tradition.
Yep.
And one, I guess, obedience to authority. Or is that?
No.
No.
The Jungian definition, which is the subjective sensing.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Right. So that's right. So one of the reasons. So I had. Okay, I had so I'm sort of explaining how I came up with subfunctions. So I had this problem with three different definitions of SI, and then I was learning stuff about Victor Galenka's subtype system, and he was sort of saying that if someone's creative, they've got extra, like say SE, NE, or FE. If someone's harmonizing, they've got extra SI, NI, or FI. If someone's dominant, they've got extra TE, FE, or SE. If someone's normalizing, they've got extra TI, FI, or SI. And I was like, I don't know. And then it struck me. So the two things came together, and I thought, what if there's a dominant, normalizing, harmonizing, a dominant, normalizing, creative, and harmonizing version of each function? And then I went through and I changed some of the names because I didn't want to confuse dominant with the dominant function. So I changed that to assertive. Then when I had a thing with imaginative and creative, and I realized and I thought, hang on a minute, guardians are not that creative, but they can be very imaginative. And then I thought, hang on a minute. Okay, the extroverting functions, they can have a creative subfunction, and the introverting ones can have an imaginative subfunction. So for SE, that would be creative rather than imaginative. And the same for TE and FE and NE. So all the introverting functions, this becomes imaginative, and it's creative for the extroverting ones. And then I started to repeat myself between assertive and normalizing. And I thought, and I thought, hang on a minute, normalizing is only in there to capture guardians. Guardians are the normalizing ones. So I thought, and Dario's reconfigured it. Right, his normalizing subtype in his descriptions is the chart the course subtype. And so basically what I did is I threw out normalizing. So that's the context for why I came up with subfunctions. That I had this DCNH from Victor, and I had this problem with three different definitions of SI. And by bringing it together and creating subfunctions, I was able to solve the problem of how to bring all the different definitions of SI under one umbrella. And so the stuff that Carl Jung was banging on about, that's the all this stuff. This is the imaginative SI. The different ways of seeing of the artist. So that is the subjective sensing. The insidious. So that again, is there. E.g., sensory imagination. What I should have written on here is somebody reading a novel. I frequently mention. I once did it. Jack Allen did a video where he was typing this woman, and she was looking like LSE, so ESTJ. And I asked the question in the chat, and then Jack was good enough to ask her this. I asked about, what do you think of description in novels? Do you like a lot of sensory description And she said yes. But she doesn't want to know, oh, the sky was blue. She wants all of those details. And I've tested this on a few Guardians. They want detailed descriptions in novels because it's evocative.
Yeah,
I can
I've
see you
seen-
nodding. Any way to expand on that, Jonathan?
Oh yeah, I'm just thinking of. I've been in the fantasy fiction groups on Facebook and stuff, and they're in other places, and there are definitely people who think if a novel doesn't have a lot of description, it's crap. They do not like it at all. They think it's just poorly written garbage, no matter what, no matter how popular it is. They like ones that have a ton of description. So
And did you ask them why they like that?
no, I didn't even think of it until right now. This was
Yeah, this is the thing, is you don't know unless you go deep, because it's so within them, because it's such a private experience. It's because the more richer the description is, the more evocative, because for them, they can really conjure up that sensory detail, imagine it.
yeah. This was years when I was. This was either before I got into typology or shortly after. So this was years ago. I do think a lot of them were also probably NFPs and stuff. So they're like in the SI as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of authors sensory heavy NFPs and NTPs.
It's like the secret superpower of the Guardians. We don't see it because they don't talk, and it's like the fact that they have this great imagination on a sensory level. If they've experienced something similar before, because then they can call it up. And I remember asking my mother about this, because she brought something up. This is what made me first think of this, is because she read the Song of Ice and Fire novels. And when she mentioned the smells in the description, it's because for me, it's hard to imagine a smell. Like for her, she could like instantly imagine a smell because it's described in a novel. And that's one of the tests that you can use if you think someone might be a guardian. It's evocative for them. So that's part of their experience. It really does paint a world and a picture for them. But like I said, again, it's like the hidden superpower of Guardians. Now, it's not much use, but it is a hidden superpower. This rich sensory imagination. Now, maybe it has a side effect in that it helps them to have good memories, because one of the ideas of John B. Arden, Armenian mother, he came up with the mnemonic of, in 1915, something terrible went unseen, the Armenian genocide. He actually put that in his memory book because he wanted people to remember it because he's got an Armenian mother. It was either 1915 or 1916. And the point is that he said that the more sort of like roots to memory and like the more sensory it is, the more you're going to remember it. Because I was looking for reasons why Guardians have good memories. And this sort of sensory detail is part of it, part of the reason why I have good memories. And then I have this point here about many imaginative guardians are frequently uncreative as a profession because they see the arts as too risky a career. Also, the temperament goes to what has already been created, i.e. the conventional. So guardians are likely to be derivative stroke classical. So maybe in terms of playing of classical instruments, you're probably more likely to get guardians because a lot of practice involved. I think Alistair Cook, the former England cricket captain, might be Scottish with the name, might have some Scottish ancestry with the name Alistair. He was on a scholarship to play the clarinet, and he had very good concentration powers as a batsman. And he was even knighted, Alistair Cook, because of his batting. I think it's nice, TJ, and I think there's an example of some of the. I think in classical music, you can get a lot of guardians they're willing to do that 5 hours practice every day.
I think a lot of theatre actors are probably SJs because you have to memorize a lot of lines. And
Maybe.
yeah, I think Patrick Stewart, for instance, is probably in ISTJ or something.
Well, we know that. I mean, Jeff that was mentioned frequently. He thought Picard was ISTJ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, apparently Patrick in the start of season 1, Patrick Stewart thought this was. He wasn't sure if he was going to take it because he was a bit off put by some of the stuff, but
They told him it won't go to series anyway. He'll just give you a load of money for the pilot.
Yeah,
He only took it because he thought it wouldn't become a series. I think his agent told him it wouldn't become a series.
Or if it did become a series, it would be over in like one season or something. Yeah. And then at first, he was in the first few episodes, he get very annoyed behind the scenes with a lot of the cast because they were goofing around and making jokes all the time and stuff. And he actually brought them into the captain's ready room where Picard has his meetings. And he sat them down and he gave them a big lecture and take things seriously, stop acting up. And I think Dees Crosby says, Patrick, sometimes you just have to have fun. And he says, we are not here to have fun. Apparently, also by the end of season 1, he was by far the silliest member of the cast. And the one who learned the most.
Yeah, you can get that. Like Dario was written about, because I looked at the subtypes of ISTJ because of Tel. Tel is partially like a harmonizing subtype of ISTJ. I looked at the normalizing, and that was the one that Dario wrote as the one that can have those moments where it can act like an NFP. Like out of nowhere, you can have these weird. Remember Hailey when we did? I've got a super in my mouth at the moment. Apologies. Do you remember when we did that thing on Yuri Gatan? Like he would have those weird moments. That the Russian tank guy. It was like the supervisor would have these weird NE moments. Like if that explodes, your trousers will be found 2 miles away. It's like, and it's like you need a stripper. Well, you should hire me. I only charge $10,000. I'm a good-looking man. You have these weird moments, and I'm like, okay, you're kind of some STJ who's like gone has these weird NE moments. So yes. So my point there is, so yeah, I was thinking here that poetry might be something good to look at because, like I said, or if we look at people who do an art on an amateur level rather than a professional level, because I do think there's a lot of guardians out there who have talent but have not chosen to pursue a career in the arts because it's not safe enough.
Yeah. Some may have been the arts because their parents were in the arts.
Yeah.
Then again, I'm also thinking of John Major, the Prime Minister, who
he ran away from the circus to join an accountancy firm. ISTJ. Do you agree that John Major is like ISTJ AF?
Yes.
Even Stephen Fry said, we elected E.L. Wisty. That is exactly like E.L. Wisty. And E.L. Wisty was based on a real person.
I don't know who that is.
It's a Peter Cook character.
Okay.
I would just talk like this with this reduced affect display. And there's a sketch with him with John Cleese. You know what? And he talks about who's it? You know, a whale. It's an insect. An insect? Well, nonsense. Inside, it's a joke. It's like a whale isn't really a fish. It's an insect. Yeah. So, like I said, these 3 different versions of SI. Core SI, which is basically, as you say, gladly what the socionics people need to understand this. They just see this comfort sensor. Too narrow. It's like they see just the blood and guts as SE. It's too narrow. There's frequently in socionics where their definitions are far too narrow. It's just the way the brain is. SI is all of this. It's just like last time, Hailey, when we did SE, it's like all of these different things comes under the umbrella of SE. It can be like your Mike Tyson kind of SE, aggressive, put yourself on your opponent. Or you can have your harmonizing kind of SE, read the environment, adapt, make little adjustments, adapt to your opponent, go with the flow, and then come back. So I've noticed that the harmonizing subfunction tends to be interesting, but that's probably because my interaction style behind the scenes, and I tend to use a lot of the harmonizing subfunction. And it might also be because of the 6 as well. So I'm less likely to use the assertive subfunction of TI and go, this is the way it is. And Socionics is a lot like that. A lot of assertive TI. So Jonathan, I'll ask you a question. Are there any other features of SI that you think I could include, or whether I need another category? So we've got the stuff about the body, like Kersey would mention lots of guardians. Natural home of the guardians is a hospital. So many good doctors are guardians, doctors and nurses. And there's one of these fields where you can see the high IQ guardians.
I wonder if in modern America there's more STPs though, ESTPs, because the money.
Maybe I remember I agree with EJ R&D on this when he suggested surgeons ESTP. And I think, yeah, I can see that, the pressure.
Right. Yeah.
And also in an emergency room or casualty in England. And Carol talks about a friend that she knew who was a nurse. She worked in the emergency room, ESFP nurse. And if you see what student nurses are like, then you can see there's a lot of artisans amongst student nurses.
Yeah.
So yeah, it depends. Like the stuff which is emergency room, casualty, emergency room stuff, artisans do well in the high pressure environment. But in terms of Kersey wrote loads of GPs, my own GP is an ESFJ.
That's weird. I've only got one GP, because when I go to the doctor, they'll just say who's in today. Okay. Weird. Anyway. Yeah, I think you've covered all the bases.
Thank you. That's what I tried to do. Eventually, I got there after about over 5 years of like these different definitions. Because it's like I can't dismiss what Socionics was saying about comfort, especially when it was in Kersey as well. And then Jung was right as well. And it's like, so you got 3 different things. So now, some romance style stuff. Apparently, so this gets towards the SI, the caring part of it. Any comments on that, Jonathan? Maybe these square bullet points.
No, I'm reading them over. I'm trying to put my parents out of their minds. I don't want to think about rest of sexuality.
Yeah, well, if they didn't do this, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah,
I think they're very much about, I would say so, being treated the right way, especially the social conventions.
They'll show their love in different ways depending on the type. Like, yeah. Probably SJs will be more asking about your feelings in your day and talking more, whereas the STJs are more providers and making sure you've got food on the table and that sort of thing. Well, the STJs will buy the food and the SFJs will make the food and then come and teach the STJs to make the food.
I'll just a minute. So yeah, I'll just do it like that. Yeah. My stereotype is that they want to go through the process of courtship the SFJ, the SJs in particular. They want to go through the whole process.
My mum said that I think before her wedding, my dad sent her a rose or something or flowers. Before. I was like, oh, that was sweet.
But that can also vary by culture. What are the conventions of courtship based on each culture or subculture?
You want to assume the partners?
That one seems ISFJ, the prone.
Mm-hmm. Power does not seem as important in such matters. I wonder if that's more for the ISJs than the ESJs, especially the ESTJs.
Now, part of this has to be put in mind that you've got NTPs writing this and sort of like writing their fantasy of what they want. You get a lot of NTPs writing stuff in socionics.
Yeah, and also things like LSC and socionics is a bit softer than in Myers-Briggs because they'll put like they'll see an ESTJ in Myers-Briggs and say LSI quite a lot.
Yeah.
Or even sometimes ISTG and LSI, or INTG and LSI.
Yeah, I won't get into that. Like that's
I will.
a whole video in itself.
I will. They have a interesting definition of a interesting take on LSI.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the type that's the most different from Western type.
Yeah.
So it might be exaggerated, but it's definitely something there
Mm-hmm.
about Guardians.
Yeah.
The physical care, the attention to the internal bodily harmony, and other people's internal bodily harmony, especially when it's SFJ for other people. Definitely.
Yeah, I think there's a lot bit more SFJ than STJ overall. This part.
Like I said, Jonathan, when you're writing it by NTPs,
yeah.
I mean, Alshra ENTP, Galenka. When Galenka came up with this, INTP, TINX for Galenka, Bukalov, ENTP. There's a lot of NTPs in socionics.
There's a lot of NTPs that want to marry their mother. Yeah. Prone to assume the partner needs to support and help in everyday match to meet their needs. That sounds more ESFJ. Then, yeah, not much more to say.
Okay, let's see if we got some more. Let's see what is worth. I suppose this bit here at the top, right? What they think of the other styles. So the aggressor is more like artisan and especially ESTP and ISTP for aggressor.
They tend to perceive aggressive over the top and
yeah, too forward maybe.
Tend to see victims as puzzling and never condemned to so as paranoid and insecure. Did people see me as paranoid?
Yeah, I mean, our name, the name for the MPs, Hailey, is only marginally improved in the translation. Originally, it was infantile, and now it's childlike. Maybe the next one it will be like teenager or something. I don't know.
I don't know. I think some guardians would see NPs as childlike in the negative sense, like grow up.
Yeah,
grow up.
both. Yeah.
Yeah, this is like the ideal of what the romance styles would be like, or even the stereotypes rather than what actually is.
Yeah, like if you got like an ISFJ, it's like, or like an SFJ, or SFJ's at like 269. You know, a lot of that SI in there. Got anything else? Oh yeah, this is sort of like that's just a bit on the childlike, but not a little bit off topic. Sort of like the childlike types tend to perceive the caring types as comforting and pleasant company with delightful sense of fun. Victor should have been more honest, and they like the fact that the guardians do stuff for them. Right, so and then there's a bit there with yeah, this was like Dario's names in 8 Keys to Self-Leadership. Sorry, which was the book that those definitions came from, so I should promote that. 8 Keys to Self-Leadership. And Magic Diamond is a follow-up to this book. Right, so okay, here's some stuff on instinct. Right, okay. So this is more SE. This is like this is George Binney Dibley. And it's just some overlap with Vanderhoot. Can't really get into it that much because there's a lot of it. Yeah, the optic thalamus. So that's part of the limbic system. Instinctive reactions. This was written in the 1920s. Yeah, the mental side is an interesting. It was a good writer, George Binney Dibley, because he wasn't a psychologist. He was actually a newspaperman. He worked on the Manchester Guardian, and he has a good writing style. I've got to, just going through because there's a lot to get through. Let's just see. Is there anything I wrote there? Oh, that was about some extra functions coming in. Like the ESTJ uses some SE, that ISTJ uses some TI, that ESFJ uses some SE, and ISFJ uses some FI. It's certainly when ISFJ is writing poetry, I would say. Tactical and logistical. Right, here we go. Enforces procedure, ESTJ. ISTJ analyzes to inspect. So this is more coming from myself. Takes action to supply. Accommodator empathizes to care about physical needs of others. So this is just my idea of how that third slot function is used by each of the guardians. That's me sort of going off the deep end in like trying to sort of like come up with some correlates of functions, like double utilitarian. Going into the weeds, you sort of need to know a lot of Kersey theory or personality theory rather, to sort of get this. What have I put about guardians? Single STJ is single cooperative and single enterprising. SFJ is a double cooperative. Right. Why are they double cooperative? Probably because they are informal and they're cooperative, whereas these are directive and cooperative. What else have we got? Is this? Oh, right. This is what's this? That's not right. Okay. That's right, yes. So this is Vanderhoop talking about why he is defining the function as instinct rather than sensation. So the summary of this is that he's talking about perception here when he talks about something in the background and recognizing something as, say, like which is part of which, and like making sense of the sensory field. And so the whole of the simple sensory experience belongs to the instinctive sphere. And it differentiates that from perception. And then B is about, yes, impossible to make a clear distinction between our reaction and our awareness of the sensation. So this is about how it's bound up with emotion. So association psychology has more or less recognized the fact in stating that a feeling tone is associated with our perceptions. Perceptions are, however, mental contents of far greater differentiation than the field of sensation that we have in mind. And there is also no reason to include emotional reactions here, because like I said, perception is different from this sensory instinctor. Perception is related to thought. It's a posher part of the brain. It's more intellectual perception, because you're making sense of you're recognizing certain shapes and words, and you're making sense of the raw sensory data. We're concentrating on the raw sensory data and the emotional reaction to that raw sensory data, and how it leads towards certain tendencies towards certain actions. And there's also, since these are the outset parts, this emotional reaction may show various degrees, fluctuating indeed between indifference, which is itself a reaction, and the feeling of worthwhileness, driva, or such special emotions as fear, disgust, wonder, anger, tender fearing. So it's like instinctive reaction. Someone sees a baby, they have that instinctive reaction to the baby, or someone in need, that you can have that an instinctive reaction. Or someone turns over a stone and there's something disgusting under it, and everyone from lots of different cultures has the same facial expression and reacts in the same way with disgust. It's like, ugh. And that is an immediate reaction to what you've seen. You're not thinking about it. You're not effing or FIing it. It's bound up with it. Or maybe physical pain. Someone like slaps you and you immediately feel the pain. The emotion is bound up, is immediate with the sensation. Instinctive is a peculiarity of such instinctive emotional reactions that they may be experienced again and again in association with the same objects, and that certain parts or qualities of the object may have great influence as a stimulus to the instinct. Desire and emotion may be constantly evoked by the same exciting factors. This is true only in the instinctual satisfaction realms of the spring. The reappearance of and then an impulse to act, and this is more so with artisans, where they get that again. It's the impulse to act, or habit, which I put into SI. So it's like they may assume emotional reactions to sensation are frequently accompanied by an impulse to act. In our conscious mind, they may assume various forms, e.g., that of a vague inclination to do something, or of a strong impulsive drive towards certain acts. So I put that like artisans are particularly susceptible to this. Or there may arise a certain mode of behavior determined more or less by habit. That's your guardians, that sort of like impulse to habit. All these cases have in common the fact that sensation, emotion, and action form a unity, and that action and reaction are directed by emphases in the field of sensation, determining attention and emotion. So I'll say that again. Good INTP detail there. Before cognitive psychology was a field, all these cases have in common the fact that sensation, emotion, and action form a unity. Sensation, emotion, and action form a unity, and that action and reaction are directed by emphases in the field of sensation, determining attention and emotion. The forms assumed by action of this kind are remarkably constant. It is as if an unconscious pattern of activity was activated, but the emphases which determine the course of action may, under the influence of experience, gradually shift. In this way, sexual inclinations, for example, may be controlled by different emphases in emotional sensation in different people. It is well known, too, that the habits may change with changing circumstances. The existence of a special instinctive mode of learning by means of a gradual displacement, like learning again. Yeah, and then this special kind of knowing, I find this interesting. In this field of knowing, too, there is a definite form which may be distinguished, which belongs to the sphere of instinct. Although we may know our way about in a forest or town, we may nevertheless feel at a loss if asked to communicate this knowledge. We possess a practical knowledge, but no articulate expression for it. One often comes across this phenomenon among sporting folk, but we cannot say that this kind of knowing is unconscious. When listening to sportsmen carrying on endless conversations concerning the details of their hobby, one gets the impression that they are speaking in terms of some common experience, although they would find it difficult to convey this experience to an outsider. They are conscious enough of it themselves. It is impossible to say that this form of knowing is chaotic. It is controlled by fixed associations of sensation and action. The original instinctual interest lending to things their primary meaning. Driva. So Driva wrote this book called Instinct in Man, and if I was a 5, I would have read it. Has led to further experiences, as a result of which fresh emphases in the field of sensation have provided a secondary meaning. And these points attracting special attention are linked up by being associated together in practice. So there are little bits that you have to think a lot about. If you want to get a deeper understanding. As part, a single experience about this being moded, about it being together. We now see the sphere of conscious instinctual experience as a mode of conscious orientation. That was his reframing of what a function is. A mode of conscious orientation, covering various items which nevertheless appear to us, coupled with our emotional and behavioral reactions thereto, as part of a single experience, bringing with it a practical form of knowledge, inseparable from the sensations involved. So emotion is part of this instinct. Just like when I showed the stuff with the Dario's definition of SE, that he had thrill and exciting in it, and Dario what he had for SI, and it was like go to what feels safe and what is customary. The emotion is part of the function. And because of that, Van der Hoop thought that Jung should have renamed the function, or rather, because of that, Van der Hoop said, I'm going to call this function instinct instead of sensation. And then I said, I'm going to call it instincting to make it an ing like all the other ones. And then I went, I'm going to call it sensory instincting. So, and I think it reflects the way the brain is, because we do have this limbic part of the brain. What's this about? Investigate. Oh, right. Oh, yes. There's a bit there about him. Yes. Oh, I've got to read all of that's gold. Hang on a minute. Yeah, all of that. It may be useful to realize that experience of this kind is by many people only distinguished with great difficulty, although it is shared by everyone. This is because other functions, and this is a key insight, thinking about the material of this function is used by other functions. This is because other functions employ this experience as material for other purposes, as I hope later to demonstrate. And the moment we try to examine the instinctive sphere, these other processes which do not belong to it are activated and the original experience becomes blurred. These INTP nuances. Hence, we must develop in ourselves an, as it were, innocent state of mind in order to be able to become. He was very much interested in phenomenology, Van der Hoop, very much interested in studying forms of consciousness. Hence, we must develop in ourselves, as it were, an innocent state of mind in order to be able to become more aware of this kind of experience. And in this, we may be helped by situations which especially involve this mode of orientation. Now, he gives an example of riding a horse, and I give this as an example of where one of the differences I have from Model G, in that Van der Hoop talks about when he was riding a horse, he was pretty much forced into SE. It wasn't a case of him being on his territory. The situation demanded he had to be in an SE state. So, for example, here, at the time when I was investigating the instinctive sphere, I took up riding again after a long interval, and it taught me a lot about the state of mind in which more complicated mental activity must be cut out. If I had begun to think too much about it, I should certainly have been in danger of being thrown by the horse. If I had given way to feeling, I should perhaps become anxious or too self-confident, which would have been no more helpful, nor would intuition have got me very far. Yet I was conscious of being intensely active, my attention being riveted on the totality of my sense experience and my reactions to it. So he was in SE. It was in instinct, especially SE. This mental activity, bound up as it unquestionably is with emotion, is very difficult to describe. And that would be my case, because we usually taught that. So for Vanderhoop, sensation is mixed up with emotion, and he's renamed it instinct. I think that matches how the brain is, but we've got this limbic system. We've got this difference between emotions and feelings. What it means, though, is we've got this situation where we have to make these fine distinctions and discussions between, okay, when is it an emotion and when is it a feeling? But that mirrors the brain. So I would say that a lot of mammals, like, for instance, if you look at a dog's behavior, I can say that dog is definitely experiencing emotions. I don't know if it has feelings, but I know that a dog experiences emotions. You can see that when a dog is afraid, you can see when a dog is aggressive, you can see when a dog is happy. And John B. Arden wrote something about, he postulated about why mammals developed emotions. And he wrote about the evolutionary advantage of emotions in terms of remembering certain behaviors. So fear. So an animal that learns to experience fear, that has an evolutionary advantage to stay away from those kinds of animals because they elicit fear in the animal. So you see what I mean? So you got towards an evolutionary advantage of why mammals developed the experience of emotion, because a snake doesn't experience emotion. It just has reflexes to it. But mammals experience emotion. Reptiles don't. What else there? Do you see there's a lot of these little fine distinctions in Vanderhoop? That might be over egging the pudding going over there. Okay. So anything else? Most of this is like visuospatial, like Dario would say that the back of the brain is activated a lot when you're doing this visualizing, and the IS types have most activity in the back of the brain in those regions. Like Dario has these things like build, rotate, image, things like that. And so this ability to visualize here is probably strongest, especially if it's something that's already been encountered in the IS types, the sensory introverts, those with ISXX in their code, the ones with INS in their code. Bodily kinesthetic, you can see that as a combination of SE and SI, just depending. Like you can sort of see like maybe SI kind of dance, SE kind of dance. It depends. Like ballet might be a bit more SI. Like it depends. Like I can see, like, and I can see an SI and an SE version of both of these. And then also there's a bit here with the naturalist. Again, the care for the animals. Like there's a bit of that SI going on here. Now, like, so they put that in as an intelligence. So it's like the left-wing activists got an intelligence for this, the eco-warriors. And it's like, what about the libertarians might say, oh, why don't we have an intelligence for being money-wise? Why don't we have one for business head sense, a business head? And then, do we have little bits here? Yes. Right. So a little bit, this goes towards the subjective part of SI. So as I frequently say, with all the other functions, with all the functions that are not SE and SI, you can deduce a definition just from saying feeling and empirical, feeling and subjective. From those two ideas, I can deduce. I can deduce them. Can't do that with SE and SI, because if you were just to deduce it, you would have for SE empirical sensing, and you would have someone that is very observant and notices lots of details in his or her environment. Sensory acuity. That would be your definition of SE, if you're just going deductively. And SI would be subjective sensor. It would be what Carl Jung wrote about SI. But all of this other stuff that's coming from instinct, that's coming from the artisan and guardian instinct, wouldn't be in the definition. But for all the other definitions, you can deduce them. So, for example, define TI. Well, it's thinking and it's subjective. And then you can go through and give examples, and you can do it for all of them. But you can't do it for SE and SI. You only get part of it if you do SE and SI and define it that way. So, Jungian roots, Jung, a very short introduction. Yeah, and then it was Shalina that brought to my attention that this writer was ripping off Marie-Louise von Franz in certain of his examples without giving her credit. She was probably like INTJ or INTP, Marie-Louise von Franz. Whereas the extroverted sensation type is guided by the intensity of objective influences, says Jung, the introverted type is guided by the intensity of subjective sensation excited by the objective stimulus. Emma Jung, who considered herself to be of this type, described herself as being like a highly sensitized photographic plate. Every detail of a situation is noticed and can be recalled at will. Such people have... I've also noticed that some other IS types can have this. Imogen had this before she had her accident. Imogen on the channel had this like photographic memory. Now, a lot of cognitive scientists are highly skeptical of people saying they have a photographic memory, but I believe some people. Such people have vivid memories for sights, colors, passages in books, sounds, conversations. So that's a little bit like the sensory imagination part of SI that was going over the subjective sensor. Like it goes together. And so this is part of it why guardians might have good memories. Another reason why they have good memories is the fact that they have the discipline to go over something again and again and again and again until they just know it off by heart. SI shadow, yes, definition. Jung. Oh, here we go. Does not as guided them, still merely starting from the points of perceptions, yes. He is often completely unaware of his sensations and the consequence. Was that for the... What was that for? Shadow, introverted sense. Oh, right. The intuitive. Right. So this shows how they have less attention to their bodies. The intuitive does have sensations, of course, but he or her is not guided by those as such. He uses those merely as starting points for his perceptions. However, he is often completely unaware of his or her, and as a consequence is prone not to notice when he or she is tired, cold, or hungry. When his or her introverted intuition does become active, it can cause him or her to misinterpret messages arriving from his or her own sense organs, with the result that they may become hypochondriacal, which is, I assume, how it's pronounced, hypochondriacal, or indulge in fads about diet. So you see there, there's a little bit of all or nothing nature about it. Right then. Both of you have been off for so long that I've not reached a stimulus and my headphones are switched off. I've got a bit more. Right, yes. This is a bit more on the sensory nature of description. So this is from, I think it's from Pat Patterson. Right, because he was always banging on about object writing as an exercise for songwriters. Just describe objects using all of the senses, or using the 5 main senses: visual, auditory. Okay. Here we go. So this is the SI part. This is SI. This should have been earlier on. Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass. This is like the Guardians. They want that sensory detail. Right. Where do these words take you? Do they make you see something? What kind of bed? Single? Double? What colour is the bedspread? The pillows? Where is the light coming from? I think he's ISFP. Table lamp above the headboard. When a lyric stimulates and provokes your senses, you draw the images from your own experience. SI, subjective. You fill Mike Reed's and Alan Shamblin's words with your stuff. They involve you, so the song becomes about you. That's the power of sense-bound writing. It pulls the listener into a song by using his own memories as the song's material. See what I mean about the subjective factor? You're getting the subjective factor in here. Okay, a bit on ISFJ and ISTJ. ISFP. ISFP and ISFJ. Right. Yeah, how SI is used as a tool here. So third slot SI. And so I would say that ISFP uses the imaginative subfunction of SI quite a lot for its own artisan purposes. And frequently ISFP will have a 4 in them, so they're more likely to want to express themselves creatively than ISFJ. Like I said, the ISFJ can write poetry on an amateur level, but ISFP is much more likely to want to express itself professionally with their SI. And plus, they've got the FI working with it as well. Also,
I need to go in a couple moments.
Okay. I'm there's got a few little bits left, so that'll be for the audience. I'm just gonna go. Okay, so folks, pause that, read it, folks. Right, and then that might be people can pause that and read it too because we've only got a little bit left, so we've got to go quickly. All right, so some jokes. SI man. I think this guy is like an SFJ.
Hmm.
The combi reacher. So he sees the beach, he's disgusted by all the mess. He picks up the rubbish, but he doesn't want to bend over and hurt his back. The only drawback is Amazon now suggests items such as incontinence pads and mobility aids, but I'm sure I'm glad of these in time too. So I call him SI. I'm on, I think I titled this slide SI in human form. SI man. It'd make a woman a good wife. Do all these SI things for you. I mean, a good husband. Right. Oh, yes. Most Guardian sounding ship I've ever heard. HMS Inflexible. Right. Oh, yes. About being on time and respecting people from Carol Linden. Did that one before. Yeah, ISTJ and ISTP. People can again joke again. ISTJ. There's some that. I'll do like that. Then I'll wait for people can pause it and read it. That's ISTJ. Here's another one. Oh, that's some little bits about SI versus NI. I'll put change there, but I should have meant development. Development, not change, because change can be like switching to something completely different. But development. Again, so getting these differences. Because I was trying to prove to the socionics people that SI is more than just comfort sensing by saying, look, NI is about change. What's the opposite of change? Doing the same thing over and over again and being. So it's like, if you use this definition, socionics people, it will be the opposite and it will be right. So again, these are my little things for trying to get trying to convince the socionics people, but I had no luck. That's me, Austrian School Economics. That's the finger down, Jonathan. Anything else? Yeah, that's just me going on about socionics NI, SI. That's not right. Yes. In India, this is your STJs talking. Use the right tool for the right job in the right way. And then Dario explaining about temperament. That, and he got this from Linda Barons, and I got permission from him to show it, that the key three types are world-oriented. And so basically what it is the reason why it's SJSP rather than the reason why it's asymmetrical is that, bottom line, the abstract types are more about their interpretation of the world. And so the nature of that interpretation, whether it's intuiting with thinking or intuiting with feeling, is more important than the nature of the perception. Whether it's because when the concrete types are more world-based, and so what becomes more important for them is whether it's SE or SI. And so that's the difference. That accounts for the asymmetricality of it. Because if you're being completely symmetrical, it would be SP, SJ, NP, NJ, or ST, SF, NT, NF. But it's asymmetrical, and this is one of the reasons from a functional level why it's asymmetrical, the Kersey temperaments. The tough hole hoggers. Now, jolly organizers, do you know what that is? So that was in Kretschmer's book. I think that's an ESFJ, a jolly organizer. I went back down from that. Tough hole hoggers, the ESTJs, and the jolly organizers. Maybe some ESTPs as well for tough hole. Is it cycloclines? These are the sensing types. These are the more abstract types. But these could be also seen as extroverts and these as introverts, because you've got the formalists. And it's like, so you could argue these are introverts and these are extroverts, because they've got empiricists. But you see, Van der Hoop disagreed with Kretschmer's. Like, he was like, you think you're describing introverts, but really you're describing something else. And Kersey was the same. Okay, so that's the logistical intellect. We've done that. These are the different roles. I should have mentioned these before, but yes, these are the kind of roles that you can get with SI, when it's got SI with TE, which is like you're monitoring, paying attention to detail, like accountants or supervisor, a foreperson, supplier, protector, for people, their physical needs, make good parents. And there's just a bit to end with. Right, so people can. There's the key quotes. I should have had this right near at the beginning. Instinct, sensory instinctor, not sensor. And then more. Sensory instinctor, not sensor. And then that's the final bit, as people would say, the traditionalists, SJ, or whatever is traditional to their subculture. That's the final slide.
All right. Well, I have to go. Thank you guys so much. That was very informative, and I really didn't know a lot about SI, so that, very informative for me. So thank you very much.
Hey, so I think I've got on track after about 10 minutes of fumbling around.
That's okay. I think we powered through it. So next one is going to be on.
Wow, now we're on one of these rational functions. So, which one would you like to do? You've got FE, FI, T, or TI.
We'll find out next episode.
Yeah, find out next time. Surprise.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
No,
Bean cancers.